If you're looking for a new way to support the podcast, check out Dubby.gg, an energy supplement company trying to make a difference. There you can use code SIDEMISSION for 10% off your order. Thank you to Dubby for sponsoring this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome into the newest episode of Side Mission. I, like always, am your host, Rusty Ellis, joined by the boys, Kyle Lynch, Matt Beck, and, well, we've got a couple apologies that we have to make before we get this episode rolling. One, we have to apologize. It has been a minute since the last traditional episode of Side Mission. A lot of that is my fault. I've been moving for work, and that's a pain, as I'm sure all of you know. As well as you've seen by the title, this is our Shadow of the Erdtree review. This is not the first time we have recorded for Shadow of the Erdtree, and no, it did not take us 2 months to beat Radon. The reason why we were recording this is because we had an audio issue, and this was the first available date the three of us could get together. So, we are talking about Shadow of the Erdtree. We are going to go very in-depth with it. The problem is, it's just been a few months since the expansion came out. That being said, fellas, let's go ahead and jump right in. Kyle, when I think back to when we first queued up Shadow of the Erdtree, the first real positive that I think of, because there are a lot of positives with this is a phenomenal expansion. I think all three of us agree 100% lived up to the hype that had been built up behind it for as many months as it was in the marketing cycle. The sheer size and scope of the map when you get into the Realm of Shadows. We talked about it a lot, Kyle. It almost feels like a disservice calling this a DLC. It really is an expansion to the highest degree.
Yeah, I kept catching myself saying DLC, and it's an expansion. There's a big difference, especially when you look at something this massive. You know, I don't necessarily think that, the size of the map determines DLC. I think it's the amount of content that determines whether or not it's an expansion or DLC. And this delivered so much content, it felt like a whole separate game. And I loved it, dude. They had a whole new leveling system. They had all new weapons, enemies, spells, everything. They went nuts with the bosses in this. And I have never had so much fun with an expansion to a game or even a DLC with the game. Because they just had so much content. I mean, seriously, it felt like a whole other game, and people were saying it the whole time. It's true. And if you haven't played it by this point, you are missing out. I am so serious. You've got to pick this up and play it.
I think that, and there's been a lot of talk about the quality of Shadow of the Erdtree, and a lot of it, I think, Kyle, for the most part, has been, and I'm Matt as well, I don't know why I just said Kyle there, but a lot of it has been overwhelmingly positive, and I think justifiably so. Now, there are things that we're going to critique. There are certain bosses we don't like. But I think if you're one of those people that you got into this and you played, 30, 40, 50 hours of this, I think my playthrough ended at around 45 hours, I want to say. I want to say that's how long it took me to get through the entirety of the Shadow of the Erdtree. Keep in mind, there is one boss that I still haven't beaten that has a remembrance, but I've been putting that off because I'm terrified of the Abyssal Woods. I think for good reason, you both know. But there have been some takes that I've seen that have been, exploration is not nearly as rewarding and it isn't as fun this time around. Namely the Act Man, Kyle, I'll just go ahead and say his name. Namely him, he put out a bunch of stupid-ass tweets saying that he was just still disappointed with how quote-unquote bad Shadow of the Erdtree was. He then turned around and quote tweeted that the next day and said, "Man, I say crazy shit when I'm drunk." I was like, "Nah, big fella, don't walk that back. Don't walk that back. Say it with your chest." But I think that for me, the exploration is one of the best parts. And Matt, I think that we talked about it a lot, was it kind of harkens back to when Elden Ring first came out back in 2022. It feels a lot like, okay, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what my objective is. But if I pick a direction and I go in that direction, I'm going to be rewarded with something. And I loved that.
Yeah, the level design in this game is equal to, what we had in the base game of Elden Ring. and like there were no like shortcuts, there was no laziness. It wasn't just, let's take what we did before and just kind of repeat that. No, it was entirely new environments. And one thing that I loved in the discovery of this game is just how like you could be just walking out in the woods and you'll come across like a minor boss that's this giant red bear, or these smaller hippos. Like it's that kind of mystery that I love. Like not everything's going to be a big boss, and then just those moments when you're just roaming around and all of a sudden a dragon just flies overhead, or there's a dragon fighting a bunch of knights, and it's just such cool scenery. And I'm just like, yeah, you know what, big fella, I'm gonna let you handle all of that, and I'm just gonna go this way because I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. But yeah, Miyazaki, they did not cut any corners in this. Exactly this expansion. Like it was just pure from soft gameplay, like just everything that I could have asked for from something like Elden Ring. And I know I've had this conversation with you before, Rusty, how I was like, some people will say that, DLC or whatever does not deserve a Game of the Year nomination, but Shadow of the Erdtree 100% deserves a Game of the Year nomination because it almost feels like an entirely new game from FromSoft.
Well, I mean, when you think about the length by itself, and again, like Kyle said, like length and size doesn't necessarily determine the quality of a game. It doesn't exactly determine that. But, I mean, when y'all start to think about it, I mean, if it took you 30, 35 hours to get through this expansion beginning to end and you did everything in between, like that's a full game. That's a full game by a lot of game standards. And that's just one expansion. And I think that alone, it makes the price tag worth it. The $40 price tag to get into this game, it's made worth it because I feel like you could probably spend well over 100 hours, like Kai Cenat did, just strictly because of the Radon fight. You could spend probably 100+ hours in this DLC and still find things that are new. And I like that. Again, it goes back to when Elden Ring first came out. It's that same feeling of you walk 100 feet in one direction, you will likely find something cool that you didn't know was there. So that was a lot of fun. Now, the one other thing, and I know that we were all kind of split on this when the expansion first came out, but I think that we all came to understand it by the time we got done, and that's the new progression system. So I know there's going to be people out there that try to crucify me, the grammar police, if I don't call it Shadow Tree fragments at least once in this episode. So there was your one time, because we're English, we won the war, we're calling it Skidoo Tree fragments. I do not care about Old English. None of us do. Go to hell, Redcoats. We won the war. So, and we just won the most medals at the Olympics. So you can go fuck yourself. But I think that the Scattered Tree fragments and the Revered Spirit Ash fragments are both very interesting. Now, again, we first got introduced to them. The one thing we all said was, hey, to everyone that we knew that was going to play it, that we had played it before, we said, hey, understand, you are going to get destroyed early in this DLC. It is every bit as difficult as the end game of the base game, and then some. Like, there are bosses in this DLC that we have already mentioned that rival Melania and, the rival, oh my god, I'm blanking. They rival Melania and Horaloo and Moog for some of the hardest boss fights in the Fire Giant in the base game. There are some bosses that make them look easy. There are bosses that make them look like a cakewalk. And a lot of how you deal with the DLC is the new progression system with Scattered Tree Fragments and Revered Spirit Ashes. Revered Spirit Ashes help upgrade both your Summoning Ashes and Torrent, and the Scattered Tree Fragment both negates the amount of damage you take and increases the amount of damage you can deal to enemies. Now, obviously, early on, you find 2 or 3 fragments, you get your blessing to +2, +3, you're not going to see that big of a difference. You'll see a small difference, but not a big one. But as you go further and further along, and I know the 3 of us all maxed out our blessing at some point, we all started to notice that, okay, enemies that were giving me a lot of trouble early, now they feel like normal enemies. I didn't like this progression system early, Kyle, but I do feel like that a lot of that was a product of getting my ass handed to me over and over, to where now I've put that time in, I've built my stats up, now I feel like I'm more prepared for what the DLC has to offer. Do you feel like that's the case, that it might be something that you have to just grind through early to really appreciate later?
I actually do. I think that it was really funny how right before this DLC dropped, there were people who, us included, were like, you know what? This ain't gonna be bad. We've been playing this game for a while. We've got highly level characters. We're gonna go in, probably beat this DLC in a day. And boy, were we wrong because they made everybody go through the same experience, which now that I've completed it, I think is genius. Because had they not created a new leveling system, had they allowed us to come in with our over-leveled characters, there would have been people who beat the DLC in an hour. And I don't think this, expansion would have been talked about near to the extent that it was. It would not have been as popular because everybody didn't get the same experience. Coming in, everybody struggled. Everybody, didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do. We all kept dying to the most basic of enemies, and I really appreciate that. I think that that was genius because it really escalated the amount of popularity that it got. I mean, I still see it talked about on Twitter, but man, the first month and a half it was out, that was all I saw everywhere. And it's because we all, kind of progressed through the game. Some people beat it a little bit faster, but I mean, genuinely about the time I started seeing spoilers for, late game stuff, it was about the time that, Rusty and I had beat it, and I really do gotta say that I appreciate the new level system, and I appreciate the way that they made us suffer through those, early parts, because it's just something about the Souls games that when you start and you are weak and you're getting one shot by basic enemies, and then, you look at the end game where you are just super OP. It's that progression and looking back on look how weak I used to be and how strong I am now that gives you that sense of pride in your character that I think, we wouldn't have felt if we hadn't had this new progression system.
Matt, what do you think?
No, yeah, I agree with Kyle there. Honestly, the way that they handled it, I thought if you're going to take something an expansion to this caliber, and that some people maybe they didn't even play Elden Ring when it first came out, but once they started seeing more stuff about, especially with how everybody was hyping up the expansion, and maybe it was the first time they were getting into it. Obviously, you do have to hit a certain point to access the DLC, so newcomers would still have to play the base game. But kind of introducing that leveling system, it kind of makes it a little fair. I don't want to say fair because this game's not meant to be fair. It's not meant to be easy. So I think the fragment feature was well done. I can kind of see why people might not agree with it, especially because you do have to look for them, but that's just part of the fun. I mean, there's 50 of them or something like that, and I know all three of us, we found them. we found all 50. But I know because you guys were kind of getting into the DLC a little bit, further into it than I was for a time. So I eventually started, having so much issues and struggling with the bosses, and I was like, you know what, screw this. I'm going to start going to look for these fragments, and once I did, it just made it. Made the boss game. It made the bosses more enjoyable to fight because they weren't just one-shotting me the moment I walk into a freaking boss room and then just bam, I'm literally dead.
Yeah, I mean that's something that all the bosses do have in common is that, man, they are aggressive as all get out. I mean, you step through the fog gate, you pretty much have to be ready to fight. There's no, oh, let me prepare, oh, let me buff. No, you better do all your buffs outside of the fog gate before you walk in. You are not going to have time beforehand. But I think that, and Kyle, you said it perfectly, that's one of the biggest positives in the Souls games, to all of From's games, is looking at where you were at the very beginning and looking at where you are at the end, looking how far you've come, the progress you've made. That's that rewarding feeling of these games. So when people say, well, I grinded and farmed a couple million echoes or a couple million runes just so I could be over leveled. I did that for nothing. Well, yeah, they're not making this game intending for you to breeze past it in a day. They made this game, they made it hard so that you would be forced to explore, forced to actually take in every bit of the DLC, take part in NPC side quests, look for fragments, go do side areas that, like, if you guys think about it, if you just breeze through this game, there's whole areas that you will miss in the expansion. Like, I don't think there's ever a reason in the main part of the expansion to go to the Cerulean Coast. I don't think. I think that the Cerulean Coast is an entirely optional area. The Finger Ruins are entirely optional. The northern part of the map, really outside of the north part of the ruins, out for Ramina, like the ancient ruins of Ra are pretty much optional outside of the upper level where you go after you defeat Mesmer. So there are a lot of parts of this game that you can miss. Hell, you can miss the entire fight with Gaius if that happens. And I think that that's something that this game prides itself on, making sure you take in all of it and you don't miss anything. I mean, hell, Kyle, you remember, like, I told you that, hey, you can use one of these gestures to make a statue move. And you were like, what?
That shit was so cool.
Like, there's a whole area that you can miss if you don't, like, have a gesture and everything. So I think that this progression, that constant exploration, that's the most important part of all of this. And I think that the new progression system is what really drives that home. So now, let's talk about the bosses. And I think for the most part, we all have positive feelings about a lot of these bosses. I think that when you look at bosses like the Divine Beast Dancing Lion and Rolana, Mesmer especially, I think Matir was a really good fight as well. Midra's a really good fight. Like, there are some fights that are really awesome in this expansion. And then there are some fights where I'm wondering what in the hell was Miyazaki thinking. Let's just start with the gigantic elephant in the room that is the Rodan fight at the very end, because, guys, phase 1 of the fight was hard. Very difficult, but it was very learnable. Phase 2, good luck. That is all I can say is good luck. I hope you get good RNG, and if you have to summon, I hope you summon somebody that's using a spear. I hope that you summon somebody that's got a build, because the AoE after effects on his attack in the second phase are insane. That I couldn't even tell what was happening on the screen half the time. So, Matt, I'll let you go first, and Kyle, you can go after him. I want to know, did either of y'all feel like y'all learned this fight? Because I felt like I just got lucky enough and I beat him.
No, I got very lucky. Because I did attempt him a couple of times before. I did any summonings, like, attempting it by myself for the first time. And then, I decided, what, you guys are starting to do the summons, so I'm going to start doing the summons as well. Yeah, the moment I walked in there and I summoned my mimic, I was instantly punished for it. It seemed like no matter what I did, I couldn't get a hit on him. He was very fast. He was everywhere. He's very aggressive. Like, there was just no moment that he would be chill. I'm just like, yo, calm down, please, please. I took a break from him after that because I was like, I did it twice and I was already exhausted. And then Kyle was talking about how he's like, yo, no, fuck this, man, I'm a summon. So I was like, you know what, I'll summon. The very first time that I summoned, I got really lucky. I got two good, like, other players who were magic users, and they did quite a lot of damage to him. I got some hits in there, man. I'm not going to say that I ran away the whole entire time.
So basically, I don't like the Radon fight
Not at all.
because I had to summon. And it's not just me, it's a lot of people. I saw somebody playing this 3 weeks after the DLC, or after the expansion had dropped, right? And I have never in my life seen summon signs being used the moment they're put down. This guy I was watching stream, he was at the Radon fight, and he was trying to summon, and literally couldn't summon anybody because they were just getting taken immediately. Because nobody can beat the damn Radon fight by themselves unless and what's really dumb is I saw a lot of other people, including this is the same strategy that the people I summoned used. I had to summon people who were using this big stone shield and a spear. They used the magic buff on the shield, and they just blocked and stabbed the whole time. And that was the only way that I saw anybody beat him. I think FromSoft might have gone a little bit too hard with Radon because holy shit, that second phase is unbeatable. Like I know some people have done it. Good for you if you have 1,000 hours to spend on this, but every other boss in the expansion I could beat by myself for sure. I've seen people beat by themselves. I watched the same guy who I watched have to use summons. He soloed the entire game. He soloed the entire expansion. Couldn't beat Radon. And
Jesus.
I just think that's unfair. I think it's fun that they brought Radon back. I think that the lore is really awesome. The fight itself, in the second phase specifically, is just so unfair. It's so broken because there are so many AoE attacks. You literally have to use a meta strat, and I don't like that. I wish you could just... Yeah, I want to be able to beat him how I want to beat him, or at least using the weapons I want to use. Obviously, learn the fight, but I shouldn't have to use a specific shield and spear.
No, I think that's a major negative. I agree. I think that's a major negative that you can't play the game the way you want to play it in that boss fight. Or you can, but you're probably going to be beating your head against the wall trying to figure it out or just trying to get that one run to where you can beat him. So I think that absolutely is a major issue with that fight. I think that the way I heard someone phrase it is Melania in retrospect felt fair. I still disagree with that because of the health mechanic that she has of getting her health back with every hit she lands. I don't agree with that. But you at least feel like you learn that fight versus learning this fight. Like I don't ever felt like I learned this fight. And I think that Radon, while the first phase is very fun yet very challenging, the second phase is pretty terrible as a whole when you talk about boss quality. Other bosses that stuck out in a major negative way. Let's talk about Commander Gaius, shall we? Because Commander Gaius, in my opinion, is the worst boss in the entire game. I felt that way about 4 weeks ago when we first recorded. I feel that way now. I feel like Commander Gaius is about as piss poor a boss as has ever existed. And the major issue that I have, and I alluded to it earlier, is it was not more than maybe a month before Shadow the Erdtree came out, and Hidetaka Miyazaki had an interview where he said, if you use Mimic or you use Summons, that is okay. Well, if that's okay, then why does every boss punish me for using Mimic? Why does every boss punish me when I try to do anything in the arena that isn't dodging or healing? And even healing, I feel like I'm being punished for trying to heal. I feel like at a certain point with Commander Gaius, and we'll go over a couple other bosses that we weren't huge fans of, when it came to Commander Gaius, it was like the aggression was turned up as high as it could go, and then Miyazaki said, okay, now can we make it louder? Can we take it even higher? And I don't like that. I don't like that. And I will say, in a recent patch, because I did watch somebody do this fight recently, it does look like Gaius' fight has been changed to where after the first attempt, he no longer starts right in front of you for your ensuing attempts. He starts way back in the arena like he does in the first attempt. So I do like that they changed that. I do appreciate that because that makes it a lot more fair in my opinion. I personally did not feel like Gaius was a good fight in the slightest. I didn't think his lore was that interesting. At least Radon's lore was incredible. The lore of Miquella tricking Moog and Moog getting Miquella, taking him to the Shadow Realm, and Moog is essentially sacrificed to us, the player, and his body or his soul is then put inside the body of Radon, and there's now this mashup of Moog and Radon for the final boss. Like, that lore is incredible. Miquella wants to use Radon as a consort, and that's ultimately how he was able to do so. The lore is incredible. There isn't incredible lore behind Gaius. There's no reason to like his fight. If you think that's a good fight, fuck you respectfully. That's the nicest way I can say it. Now, Matt, you deserve a chance to complain about another boss that you had to deal with. So tell me why you hate the Putrescent Knight.
So yeah, the Putrescent Knight, one of the things that I hated most about him, so if you are planning on playing this fight with some of your friends, you will have to, well, they will have to wait, basically, because you will have to, run through the area, obviously. You'll find this nice little, place, that's kind of interesting that there's a bunch of animals surrounding it. I don't know if there's lore there. But Kyle likes to kill them all every time that he's like, okay, if it takes this long to do this, and for every second we have to wait, I kill one animal. So that was funny actually. But it's the fact that you basically have to go off on your by yourself. You go up the head of the statue, and then you jump off into the abyss. And your friends about halfway into the fall cannot join, and then they have to go do the same thing. So you're down there for a couple of, probably about 30 seconds with him before they pop up. But there is just a bunch of bullshit about that fight that I didn't like. Like, for one, his little steed, I don't know what I guess it's a bull or whatever. He'll do this move where he'll jump off of it, he'll start spinning at you, and eventually I did get it down to where I could block his attacks and take less damage, so that was nice. And then he ends up, once you get to a certain point in his health, he'll end up shooting out flames, and they're hard to dodge. I stopped dodging them after a while when I realized I'm just not good at dodging the flames, and proceeded just to use my shield to block some of the damage, and I would take less. Like, I did this fight so many times with you guys, by myself, to the point where I literally got to at that point where I could block every one of his attacks, because I knew exactly when it would hit. And that's crazy, because I don't usually fight a boss that many times. But I'll tell you, though, it was so much satisfaction when I finally beat him. Like, I'm just like, never again will I fight this motherfucker. Never again will I fight him. Yeah, that was my least favorite boss here.
Now, what about you? What was your least favorite boss when you look at the entire playthrough? You know, if you couldn't choose Radon, who were you choosing?
That dumb fucking sunflower. I hate him. I hate that sunflower so much. And like, it was cool that we had a boss that had 3 phases. Awesome gimmick. But bruv, dude, I do not like when you can hit me from across the fucking arena, and then you can move fast as shit across that same arena that I cannot use torrent in. So
Yeah.
I'm spending half the fight running to you. As soon as I get to you, you zoom away, and then you do attack from across the fucking arena. It's like, bro, I just ran to you for him to do that little charge attack where he gets away, he does like 3 charges, and then once he's done with that shit, because he just like bounces, he like rubber bands back and forth. And then when he's done, he just shoots vines at you until you run up to him. And it makes me so angry, dude. They allowed you to, at the very least, right before the second and third phase, you could do a visceral, so he didn't start the second and third phase with a full health bar. It was, you took out like a quarter of it. But even with that, it was rough, dude. I had to use summons on that too. Because I couldn't get close to him and fucking hit him. Made me so mad, dude. Everybody else, outside of Commander Gaius, I felt like wasn't that bad, but the Sunflower was a son of a bitch.
Yeah, I hated the Sunflower boss too. I think that's just about as bad a boss as it gets without being Commander Gaius bad. Like, I do think Gaius is the worst boss in the expansion. I think that the Sunflower's third or second, and I do think that after factoring in the lore, I think that Radon and his first phase, he's a pretty high step above those two. Those two are pretty bad. His second phase is what really kills him. So now that we've talked about our least favorite bosses, let's talk about our favorites. And I know that one that all 3 of us liked, and I'll let you, Kyle, take the lead. I know all 3 of us were massive fans of Bale.
Yes, Bayo was my favorite, specifically because of his second phase, the opposite of Radahn. I thought his transition was insane because like he's missing some limbs, right? So he's obviously all he's war torn. His wings are all fucked up. I think they've been like ripped off, and when he goes into his second phase, he creates these wings out of lightning and like flies up into the sky and starts hurling down fireballs at you. That shit was so intense the first time I saw it. I just stopped and I just watched the sky in awe. I was like, I'm about to get killed, but I can't even do anything. This shit is so cool to look at. I didn't even care that I died. And also the fucking NPC that you get to summon, best NPC in the whole game. I loved him so much, dude. Best voice line and the memes that came out of it, dude. Uh, Bale was really like he was a really tough boss, and I did spend a lot of time on it, and I also spent a lot of time helping other people beat him as well. It, I'm not gonna lie, he was a really tough boss, but I just loved his design. I think he was the best dragon boss in the whole game.
Well, I think that I'll take it a step further than that. FromSoft has had some great dragon bosses. When you look at Black Dragon Calamite from Dark Souls, you look at Dark Eater Midir from Dark Souls 3, and there were several great dragon bosses in the base game of Elden Ring. I think that Bale is the best dragon boss they've ever done. I think that From has never. I think the Divine Dragon's another great one in Sekiro, not a traditional dragon fight, but another great dragon fight. Period. I don't know that From has ever had a dragon boss as good as Bale, and I thought that while he was aggressive and he output a ton of damage, I also felt like he was exceedingly fair in every regard. He was exceedingly fair. His hitboxes made sense. His AoE attacks were pretty punishing, but I never felt like they were just brutal. I didn't feel like there was just nothing I could do about it. I felt like, okay, this is possible. I've just got to figure it out. So, Matt, who stuck out for you?
Oh, honestly, my favorite boss isn't like one of the big names you'd expect. To be honest, he's actually the first boss that I fought, but I just feel like the design of his character, the way the boss fight, played out was just kind of like, a taste of what was to come. So for me, Divine Beast, Dancing Lion was one that stuck out with me the most. Honestly, I would fight him again, and you do get to technically fight him again. But it was just so much fun because, I was just doing so much damage to him in his base form, and all of a sudden, he just switches to different elemental attacks, like from like lightning, like ice, wind. Like it was just crazy. I felt like I was fighting the avatar of Elden Ring bosses, and just it was so much fun. Like I died a couple of times, but it's like I didn't even get mad that I died. I love this boss fight so much. Just like it's definitely going to be one that sticks with me for a long time. Like even with future FromSoft games coming out, the Dancing Line for me was fair. It didn't feel too challenging. Every time that I got hit on him, like he was hard to hit because he was just like flying around all over the place, and he did a lot of damage to me because early on, this is the first boss fight. I didn't have a lot of the fragments with me, but eventually when I got him down, I was just like, this is going to stick with me for a very long time. Like, I love his design. I love the fact that he switches it up with different elemental attacks. Like, it was, just completely fresh for me.
Yeah, I thought, especially for a first boss for the DLC or for the expansion, I felt like Dancing Lion was a perfect place to start. And love the design, even though when you get down into the lore, it's kind of creepy that it's just two humans that are hunched over that are controlling the head of the lion. It's kind of weird in that regard, but we let it go beyond that. I do think that if you're one of those people that you went and fought Rolana for your first boss, whoo boy, bless you, because you picked a brutal boss to go try to fight first, and you actually can get to her first. So I can't even imagine the people that ran up to her first try to fight her. I thought she was an incredible boss as well, though. Very difficult, but again, very fair moveset that I felt like was relatively simple to deal with once you figured it out. Me personally, I really thought that Mesmer was like the peak of bosses in this game, period.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy that he was the center of the marketing campaign, and he really is just a mid-expansion boss. You fight him at about the halfway point of the story of the expansion, and because of that, it almost feels like they were trying to almost like I'm trying to think of the right word, trying to I can't think of the right word at this moment. I'm blanking. Good Lord. But they were almost trying to mislead fans of the game and thinking, okay, this is who you're working towards. This is going to be the big, bad, hard boss of the DLC that's harder than Millennia. And while Mesmer is very hard, it's kind of interesting that after all of that, I did feel like he was, again, among the most fair boss fights in the entire game. I felt like, sure, his moves are hard to dodge, but they're not impossible. If you read them and respond to them properly, they're very doable. So I thought that his fight was, again, for me, top of the entire game, not just the expansion game as a whole. Also thought, Matir, Mother of Fingers was a really good fight. I thought that Romina, Saint of the Bud was a really good fight as well. I know that we just spent quite a while pretty much ragging on, the worst bosses of the expansion. But I think we've all agreed there were a lot of really good high points when you look at boss fights in this expansion. So, fellas, we've talked about a lot. We've reviewed it about as far as I think we can. Is there anything y'all want to add?
No.
I am really excited for the Dead Rising Deluxe Remaster next month. Shameless plug for no reason, but we will probably be doing that.
I'm going to skip that just because you said that.
That's
it. Matt, what about you?
Take Two. That's it.
Oh my God! I swear, if I get the file after we get done here and Kyle has no audio, we will not be doing an episode on Shadow of the Erdtree. Oh, man, but that's as good a spot as any to wrap up. So that's going to do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Side Mission Pod. You can follow us on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For the boys, for Kyle, for Matt, I'm Rusty. Thanks for listening.